I've been trying to figure out when I should have known. Not when I did know, that part came too late. I mean the moment when some part of me, some quiet voice I'd learned to ignore, was trying to tell me something was wrong. Because it was there. I know it was. I just didn't want to listen. This was 7 years ago. I was 26 and living alone for the first time in a small rental house outside Portland. I remember being so proud of that. My own space, my own rules, no one to answer to. After years of roommates who ate my food and played music too loud and made me feel like I was always in the way, I finally had a place that was just mine. I thought that meant I'd made it, that I was the kind of person who could take care of herself. I really believed that. The house was nothing special. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that was too small, and a backyard I never used. But it was mine, and after years of roommates and bad apartments, that mattered. It mattered more than I knew how to explain. Every time I came home and unlocked that door, I felt like I was proving something. To my parents who'd worried. To my friends who'd asked if I was sure. To myself, mostly. I wanted so badly to be the kind of woman who didn't need anyone. My neighbor to the right was an elderly woman named Patricia, who I saw maybe twice in 6 months. To the left was a guy named Eric. Eric moved in about 3 weeks after I did. I remember watching from my kitchen window as the moving truck pulled up. It wasn't a big truck. He didn't have much. A couch, some boxes, a desk, a bed frame. He did most of the unloading himself, which I thought was odd because moving day is usually when people call in favors. But he worked steadily, methodically, making trip after trip in a gray t-shirt and jeans. I remember thinking it was strange that no one was helping him. But then I thought maybe he was like me. Someone who preferred doing things alone. Someone who didn't want to owe anyone anything. I felt a kind of kinship in that watching him work. Like we were both the same type of person. Independent. Self-sufficient. I see now how badly I wanted to believe that about myself. He was maybe in his early 40s. Average height. Thinning brown hair, glasses. The kind of face you'd forget in a grocery store. I didn't introduce myself that day. I was on a deadline, but that's not entirely true. The deadline was real, but I also just didn't know how to do it. I've always been the person who waits for someone else to say hi first, who pretends to be occupied so I don't have to make the first move. I hate that about myself. This nervousness, this inability to just be normal and friendly like other people seem to be without effort. So I stayed at my window and watched him move in. And I told myself I'd introduce myself later. The first time we spoke was about a week later. I was bringing in groceries and dropped a can of tomatoes in the driveway. It rolled under my car. I was crouched down trying to reach it when I heard his voice. "Need a hand?" I looked up. He was standing at the property line between our driveways, holding a garden hose. He'd been watering the small strip of grass along his walkway. "I got it," I said, stretching further. I didn't want help. I wanted to get it myself. That same need to prove I could handle simple things on my own. He turned off the hose and walked over anyway. He knelt down, reached under the car, and pulled the can out easily. His hands were clean. No oil, no dirt. I noticed that. How clean they were. He handed it to me with a polite smile. "I'm Eric," he said. "Sophie. Nice to meet you, neighbor." That was it. A 30-second interaction. Normal. Forgettable. Except I remember thinking his smile was slightly too wide. Not creepy. Just practiced. Like he'd rehearsed it. But as soon as I had that thought, I felt guilty. What kind of person judges someone for smiling? What kind of cynical, broken person sees something wrong in a friendly introduction? I smiled back because I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to be the kind of woman who sees threats in every man who's just being polite. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but I didn't think about it again. Not consciously. I pushed it down into that place where you put thoughts you don't want to examine. Over the next few weeks, I'd see him occasionally. He worked some kind of office job. Left around 8, came home around 6. He kept his lawn neat, took his trash out on time. Sometimes he'd be sitting on his front step in the evenings with a book. We'd wave, nod, say hi in passing. It felt normal, safe, like we were settling into the comfortable rhythm of neighbors who respect each other's space. I liked that. It made me feel like I was doing this whole adult life thing correctly. Then one morning in late September, my car wouldn't start. I was supposed to drive into the city for a client meeting. I turned the key and got nothing but a clicking sound. I tried again. Same thing. I don't know much about cars, so I called a tow service and resigned myself to rescheduling the meeting. I was standing in my driveway, phone to my ear, when Eric came out his front door in a button-down and slacks, clearly on his way to work. And I felt this wave of panic that had nothing to do with the car. This was a new client, someone whose work could lead to more work, and I'd been practicing what I'd say for days. I'd picked out my outfit. I'd prepared my talking points. And now my stupid car was confirming what some part of me always suspected, that I wasn't actually capable of handling adult life alone, that something would always go wrong, that I'd always need help. I hated that feeling. "Car trouble," he called over. I nodded, frustrated with the car, frustrated with myself, frustrated that I was about to look incompetent in front of someone I barely knew. He walked over, briefcase in hand. "Mind if I take a look?" I hesitated. I wanted to say no. I wanted to handle it myself. But I also desperately needed to make that meeting, and I didn't know what else to do. So I popped the hood. He set his briefcase down on the ground and leaned in, checking a few things I didn't understand. After a minute, he straightened up. "Battery terminal's loose," he said. "Happens sometimes. You have a wrench." I didn't. Of course I didn't. I felt my face get hot with embarrassment. "Hold on." He went into his garage and came back with a small toolbox. Took him less than 2 minutes to tighten whatever needed tightening. He told me to try starting it. It started. I was so relieved I could have hugged him. Instead, I just thanked him about 5 times, my voice higher than normal, too grateful, too effusive. I could hear myself doing it and couldn't stop. "No problem," he said, wiping his hands on a rag from his toolbox. Glad it was something simple. "I owe you," I said. "Don't worry about it. We're neighbors." He smiled that same smile. Too wide. I noticed it again. But this time I was so grateful, so relieved that I wasn't going to miss my meeting, that I smiled back even wider. I told myself the first impression was wrong, that he was just a nice person, that I'd been unfair. He picked up his briefcase and left for work. I made it to my meeting on time, and I felt 2 things at once. Relief that I hadn't been stranded, and something else. Something smaller and harder to name. A feeling like I'd just proven that I did need help. That living alone didn't make me independent. That I was still the same person who couldn't handle basic things without assistance. But I pushed that down too. That was the first favor. The second favor came about a month later. I'd ordered a bookshelf online, one of those flat pack furniture things. It was too heavy for me to carry inside by myself, and the delivery guy had just left it on my porch. I was trying to figure out if I could drag it when Eric came home from work. "Need a hand," he said. Same phrase as before. I noticed that too. The exact same phrase. But I told myself people have habits. That it didn't mean anything. We carried it inside together. He even offered to help me assemble it. I told him I could handle it, and I meant it. I wanted to handle it. I wanted to sit on my living room floor with the instructions and figure it out myself, because that's what independent people do. They don't need help with furniture. But he insisted. "I like puzzles," he said, "and I've got nothing else going on tonight." And what was I supposed to say to that? No. That I didn't want his help? That would be rude. It would be ungrateful. He'd already helped me with my car. He was being neighborly. This is what neighbors do. So we assembled the bookshelf in my living room. It took about an hour. He was good at it, efficient, methodical. We didn't talk much, just focused on the work. At one point, I offered him a beer. He declined. Don't drink, he said simply. I remember feeling a small stab of something. Disappointment, maybe. Because a beer would have made this feel casual, social, normal. But without it, there was just the two of us in my living room, assembling furniture in near silence. When we finished, he stood back and looked at the shelf like he was checking his work. Satisfied, he nodded. Looks good. Thank you, I said. Seriously. Anytime. He left through the front door, and I locked it behind him. I stood there with my hand on the deadbolt for a moment, and I felt something I couldn't name. Not quite fear. More like unease. Like I'd let something shift that I couldn't shift back. I didn't think anything of it. Not really. People help their neighbors. That's normal. That's what community is supposed to be. But that night, as I was putting books on the shelf, I noticed something. He'd been in my house for an hour. He'd seen my living room, my kitchen, the hallway that led to my bedroom and bathroom. He'd seen where I kept my keys, on a hook by the door. He'd seen the sliding door to the backyard, the lock on it. He'd seen my space, the layout, the vulnerabilities I didn't even know were vulnerabilities. I stood there holding a book, staring at nothing, feeling that unease grow. And then I felt ashamed of feeling it. He'd just helped me. He'd been kind and patient and generous with his time. What kind of person repays kindness with suspicion? What kind of paranoid, ungrateful person looks at a helpful neighbor and sees danger? The kind of person who's been watching too many true crime documentaries, I told myself. The kind of person who's so isolated that she's forgotten how normal human interaction works. I shook the thought off, pushed it down with all the other uncomfortable feelings I didn't want to examine. He was just being nice. Winter came. Eric and I fell into a casual rhythm. We'd chat sometimes when we were both outside. Small talk. Weather. Work, the neighborhood. He mentioned once that he worked in IT for a logistics company. Something boring and technical that I didn't fully understand. He never talked about family. No mentions of friends. No visitors that I ever saw. I started to think of him as a loner, but not in a concerning way. Just someone who kept to himself. Like me, I told myself we were the same. Two people who valued privacy and quiet and independence. It made me feel less alone thinking that. In early December, I went home to visit my family for the holidays. I was gone for 10 days. Before I left, I ran into Eric in the driveway. He was getting his mail. I was loading my suitcase into the car. Heading out of town, he asked, noticing the suitcase. Yeah, visiting family. That's nice. Have a good trip. Thanks. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said, if you want, I can keep an eye on the place while you're gone. Bring in your mail. Make sure nothing looks off. I hesitated, and in that hesitation, I felt everything at once. A pull to say no, an instinct that said this was too much, that I barely knew him, that letting him watch my house felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But I also felt stupid for hesitating. It made sense. Mail piling up is how people know you're gone. And I didn't know Patricia well enough to ask her. Who else was I going to ask? I didn't have friends in the neighborhood yet. I'd been here less than 6 months. And more than that, I felt guilty. He'd helped me twice already. He'd fixed my car. He'd assembled my furniture. He was offering to do me another favor, and here I was hesitating like he'd asked me for something sinister. What kind of person hesitates when someone offers to help? What kind of paranoid, antisocial person can't accept a simple neighborly gesture? The kind of person who's broken by fear, I told myself. The kind of person I didn't want to be. So I said, that'd be great, actually. Thank you. No problem. Just leave a spare key somewhere and text me where it is. I put a key under the mat by the back door and texted him the location before I left. It felt fine. It felt like what adults do when they travel. You ask a neighbor to watch the house. It's normal. But I remember sitting in my car at a rest stop somewhere in Northern California, staring at my phone, feeling my stomach turn. I could still change my mind. I could text him and tell him not to worry about it, that I'd figured something else out. But what reason would I give? And what would he think of me? That I was rude? Paranoid? That I didn't trust him after everything he'd done? I put my phone away and kept driving. I told myself I was being ridiculous. When I got back, the house was exactly as I'd left it. Mail stacked neatly on the kitchen counter. No signs of anything disturbed. I walked through every room anyway, checking. I'm not sure what I was looking for. Everything was in place. Everything looked normal, but something felt different. I couldn't explain it. The air, maybe. Like someone had been there. Like the space had been occupied in my absence. I told myself I was imagining it. That houses always feel strange when you've been gone. That I was just tired from the drive. I texted Eric to thank him and told him I'd pick up the spare key later. He texted back, * no rush. I put it back under the mat, *. I didn't pick it up right away. I told myself I'd grab it the next day, but I forgot. And then I kept forgetting. And then it just stayed there. I think about that a lot. How I left it there. Not because I forgot. Not really. But because picking it up felt like an accusation. Like I was saying I didn't trust him. Like I needed to physically retrieve it to keep him from using it again. And I didn't want to imply that. I didn't want him to think I thought he was dangerous. Because that would make me the problem. The paranoid woman who sees threats where there are none. So I left it there. And I told myself it didn't matter. January was cold. I spent most of my time inside working. I'd see Eric occasionally through the window, scraping ice off his windshield in the mornings or carrying groceries inside. We'd wave. It felt normal, comfortable even, like we'd settled into a good neighbor dynamic. One night in mid-January, I was making dinner when my power went out. Just my house. I could see lights on in Eric's place and Patricia's. I checked the breaker box in the garage. I flipped a few switches, but nothing happened. I didn't know what else to do, and it was already past 8. I didn't want to call an electrician and pay an emergency fee for what might be something simple. I stood in my dark garage, flashlight in hand, feeling incompetent again. Feeling like a child who'd moved into an adult's house and was now pretending to know what she was doing. I didn't want to ask Eric. I really didn't, because I'd already asked him for help twice, and at some point I needed to prove I could handle things on my own. But I also didn't know what else to do. So I texted him, * hey, my power's out. Do you know anything about breaker boxes? *. He responded within a minute. * I can take a look. Give me 5. *. He came over with a flashlight. I led him to the garage, apologizing the whole way, saying I was sorry to bother him, that I didn't want to be that neighbor who always needed something, that I'd tried to figure it out myself. He told me not to worry about it. He spent about 10 minutes checking things, then went outside to look at the meter. When he came back in, he said, "Tripped breaker outside. Should be fine now." I flipped the kitchen light. It worked. "Thank you," I said. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The words were out before I realized what I'd said, how dependent they sounded, how they made me feel small and incapable and exactly like the person I didn't want to be. He smiled. "Just call me your personal handyman." We both laughed. It felt good to laugh. It felt like this was just a normal friendship between neighbors, like I was overthinking everything. I offered him tea. He accepted. We sat at my kitchen table for maybe 20 minutes. He asked about my work. I asked about his. He told a funny story about a co-worker who'd accidentally deleted an entire database. I told him about a client who'd wanted me to edit a 400-page memoir written entirely in Comic Sans. It felt normal, like two neighbors having tea, like something I could tell my mother about without her worrying. "Look," I'd say, "I have a friend here, a neighbor who helps me with things. I'm building a life." When he left, I locked the door and went back to work. But that night, lying in bed, I thought about the spare key again. It was still under the mat. I should get it, I thought. I should just walk out there right now and get it. But I was tired, and it was cold. And what was the rush? He'd already proven he wasn't going to misuse it. He'd had access to my house for 10 days and nothing had happened. Getting it now would just be paranoid. So I rolled over and went to sleep. In February, something changed. I started noticing small things. A drawer in the kitchen that I was sure I'd left closed was slightly open. I stood staring at it for a long time, trying to remember. Had I opened it that morning? Had I been distracted and forgotten to close it? I must have, I told myself. There's no other explanation. But I didn't believe myself. A book on my nightstand that I thought I'd left face down was face up. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, tried to remember the last time I'd read it. Had I flipped it over? Had I set it down differently than I remembered? Maybe I thought. Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I'm working too much. The bathroom door, which I always kept cracked, was fully closed one morning. I stood in the hallway, staring at that closed door, and I felt my heart start to beat faster. I opened it slowly. Everything looked normal. Nothing disturbed. But I didn't leave doors closed. I never did. The bathroom door stayed cracked. Always. Unless I'd closed it and forgotten. Unless I was losing track of my own actions. Unless living alone was making me strange and forgetful and paranoid. I told myself that was it. That I was the problem. Because the alternative was too much. The alternative meant I wasn't safe in my own home. Meant I'd made a terrible mistake. Meant I'd been stupid and naive and exactly as incapable as I'd always feared I was. So I made excuses. Each time something seemed off, I convinced myself I'd done it. That I was stressed. That I was working too hard. That I needed to get more sleep or eat better or take a break. I was being paranoid the way women are taught to be paranoid. Seeing threats in every shadow. Manufacturing danger out of nothing. I didn't want to be that woman. I wanted to be confident, secure, someone who lived alone without jumping at every sound. So I ignored it. I chose to doubt myself rather than admit I might be in danger. Then one night I came home from a rare evening out with friends, and I noticed the deadbolt on my front door wasn't locked, just the handle lock. I always locked the deadbolt. Always. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at that lock, and my hands started to shake. I tried to remember leaving. Had I been in a rush? Had I been distracted? Had I forgotten just this once? No, I thought. No. I always lock the deadbolt. It's automatic. I don't even think about it. But maybe I'd been thinking about something else. Maybe I'd been on the phone. Maybe I'd been distracted by a text message or worrying about the dinner I was running late to. Maybe I'd just forgotten. I wanted so badly to believe that. I went inside and checked every room. Closets. Under the bed. Behind the shower curtain. Nothing was missing. Nothing was obviously disturbed. But something felt wrong. The air felt different. Moved. Like someone had walked through the space recently. I stood in my living room, hugging myself, and I felt this overwhelming urge to cry. Not from fear, from confusion, from not knowing if I could trust my own mind. I checked the back door, still locked. The spare key was still under the mat. So nothing had happened. Nothing was wrong. I was just being paranoid. I thought about changing the locks. The idea came fully formed. Call a locksmith tomorrow. Change the locks. Get rid of the spare key. Make the house secure. But what would I say if anyone asked why? That I had a feeling? That a drawer was open once? That I thought maybe someone had been in my house, but I had no proof? People would think I was crazy. I would think I was crazy. And maybe I was. Maybe this is what happens when you live by yourself. When you don't have anyone to reality check your thoughts. When you spend too much time alone, you start inventing problems because you don't have enough real ones. So I did nothing. I went to bed with my bedroom door locked. And I lay there in the dark, listening to every sound, and I hated myself. I hated that I couldn't tell what was real. I hated that I'd let it get to this point. I hated that I didn't trust myself enough to act on my instincts. Most of all, I hated that I was more afraid of being wrong than I was of being in danger. A week later, I saw Eric in his driveway. He was loading something into his trunk. When he saw me, he waved. Normal. Friendly. Like always. I walked over, trying to sound casual, trying to sound like I wasn't accusing him of anything. Hey, random question. Did you come by my place recently? He looked confused. No. Why? His face showed nothing but polite concern. No guilt. No recognition. Just genuine confusion. And I felt stupid. So incredibly stupid. I just thought I saw someone near my house the other day. Probably nothing. Weird, he said. Want me to keep an eye out? No, it's fine, thanks though. He nodded, closed his trunk, and drove off. I stood there in the cold, watching his car disappear down the street, and I wanted to disappear myself. The question had sounded so stupid out loud, so paranoid and accusatory, and his reaction had been so normal. What was wrong with me? Maybe nothing had happened. Maybe I really was just imagining everything. Maybe I owed him an apology for even asking, for implying, however subtly, that he was someone to be suspicious of. I went back inside and tried to work, but I couldn't focus. I kept replaying the conversation, his confused expression, the way he'd offered to keep an eye out, like a normal, helpful neighbor would. I felt sick with shame. In early March, I started working late nights on a big project. I'd be at my desk until 2 or 3 in the morning sometimes, headphones on, focused. One night around midnight, I got up to use the bathroom. As I walked past the living room window, I glanced outside. Eric's kitchen light was on, and he was standing at his window, looking toward my house. I froze. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there. Stillness. Watching. I stepped back from the window, quickly, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stood in the darkness of my living room, pressed against the wall, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe he'd just been looking outside. People look out windows. It doesn't mean anything. Maybe he was thinking. Maybe he couldn't sleep. Maybe he was looking at something else entirely, and it just happened to be in the direction of my house. Maybe I was reading into nothing again, but it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like confirmation of something I'd been trying not to believe. I turned off all the lights in my living room and went to bed. I didn't sleep. The next day, I looked up how much it would cost to change the locks. About $150. I stared at the number on my screen for a long time. It wasn't that much. I could afford it. It would take one phone call. But I didn't make the call. Because what if I was wrong? What if I spent $150 and made things weird with my neighbor over nothing? What if he found out, and he would find out when his key didn't work, and asked why, and I had no good answer? What if I was the problem? I closed the browser. Instead, I started checking the doors obsessively. I'd lock the deadbolt, then check it 5 minutes later. I'd pull the back door handle to make sure it was secure. I started closing the blinds at night, even though I never had before. I was exhausting myself with vigilance, and I knew it. I knew I was acting paranoid, but I couldn't stop, because either I was in danger or I was losing my mind, and I didn't know which was worse. Eric noticed. One evening when I was taking out the trash, he called over from his driveway. "Everything okay? You seem a little stressed lately." My stomach dropped. He'd noticed. Of course he'd noticed. I'd been avoiding him, checking the locks constantly, closing the blinds, acting like someone with something to hide, or someone with something to fear. I forced a smile. Just work stuff. Big project. Anything I can help with? No, but thanks. He nodded slowly, like he didn't quite believe me, like he could see through the lie. "Let me know if you need anything," he said. "I'm right next door." "I will. Thanks, Eric." I went back inside and locked the door, and I stood there with my back against it, and I felt the walls closing in. He knew something was off. He could tell I was acting different. And now what? Was that going to make things worse? Was I making things worse by being obvious? I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to trust, including myself. In mid-March, I made a decision. I was going to get the spare key back, not change the locks. Not make a big deal out of it. Just get the key. Casually. Like I'd just remembered it was still there. I waited until I saw Eric leave for work one morning. I watched from the window until his car was out of sight. Then I went to the back door. I lifted the mat. The key was gone. I checked under the mat 3 times. I checked the surrounding area. I looked in the nearby flower pot along the door frame, in the small gap between the steps and the house. Nothing. I stood there, staring at the empty space where the key should have been, and something inside me broke open. He'd taken it. I knew it in my body. Not a thought, a knowing. The kind that lives in your gut and doesn't need proof. He'd taken the key, and that meant he could come in whenever he wanted. That meant he had been coming in. That meant every strange thing I'd noticed was real. That I wasn't paranoid or crazy or imagining things. That I'd been right all along. And I'd ignored it. I'd ignored every instinct because I was more afraid of being rude than I was of being unsafe. Because I wanted so badly to believe I was independent and capable, and not the kind of woman who needs to be afraid. Because I'd chosen his comfort over my own safety. I went inside with shaking hands and called a locksmith. Told them I needed my locks changed that day, that it was urgent. They said they could come out that afternoon. At 3 o'clock, the locksmith arrived, a friendly older man who changed both locks in about 30 minutes. I paid him in cash and felt a physical sense of relief as I tested the new keys. The tumblers turned smoothly, different, new, safe. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. That evening, I saw Eric come home. I watched from the window as he parked, got out, and walked to his front door. He didn't look at my house. He just went inside like always. But I knew that later, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, he'd try his key. The key he'd kept. The key he wasn't supposed to have. And it wouldn't work. And he'd know that I knew. The next morning, there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole. Eric. My heart seized in my chest. I didn't open it. He knocked again. Harder this time. Sophie? You home? I stood there, silent, barely breathing, one hand pressed against the door like I could hold it closed through all alone. I felt like a child, like I was hiding under the covers from something I didn't understand. I felt small and weak and everything I'd been trying not to be, but I didn't open the door. After a moment, I heard him walk away. I waited, then checked the peephole again. He was standing in my driveway, hands in his pockets, looking at the house. Just looking. His face was blank, unreadable. Then he turned and went back to his own place. I slid down to the floor, back against the door, and I felt tears come. Not from fear, from relief, from shame, from the weight of knowing I'd let this happen. I called the police that afternoon. I told them everything. The spare key, the things moved in my house, seeing him watch my window, the key disappearing. The officer who came out was polite but skeptical. I could see it in his face even as he wrote things down. Has he threatened you? No. Has he damaged your property? No. Do you have proof he entered your home? No, but I know he did. The officer paused. You know, or you suspect? I know. He looked at me with something like pity, like I was a nervous woman living alone, seeing danger where there was none, like I was wasting his time. Without evidence, there's not much we can do, he said, but I'll file a report. And if anything else happens, anything concrete, call us right away. What counts as concrete? I asked. A threat, property damage, him attempting to enter your home, something we can document. So I have to wait until something happens. I'm sorry, ma'am, but yes. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table and put my head in my hands. Without evidence, there was nothing they could do. And women's intuition isn't evidence. Knowing isn't proof. Eric stopped waving after that. Stopped saying hi. When we saw each other outside, he'd just look at me. Not angry, not threatening, just looking. And somehow that was worse than anything he could have said. because it confirmed what I already knew, that he knew, that he'd tried the key and it hadn't worked, that he understood I'd shut him out. And now we were in this silent standoff where neither of us acknowledged what had happened, but both of us knew. I started staying at a friend's place a few nights a week. I told her I just needed a change of scenery, that I was working on a project and needed to be somewhere different for inspiration. She didn't push, but I think she knew something was wrong. I think everyone could see I was unraveling. In April, I couldn't avoid my house forever. One night I came home late. It was past midnight. I'd been at my friend's and decided to come back to grab some clothes for the next day. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the car. Eric's house was dark. I got out, locked the car, and walked to my front door. The neighborhood was silent. No cars. No lights except the street lamp 2 houses down. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me. I turned around. Eric was standing at the edge of his driveway. In the dark. Just standing there. My keys slipped in my hand. My whole body went cold. "You changed the locks," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I didn't respond. I fumbled with my keys, trying to find the right one, trying to get the door open. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold them. "I was just trying to help," he continued, his voice calm. Even. "I thought we were friends." I got the key in the lock, turned it. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. "Sophie!" I went inside and slammed the door, locked it. Deadbolt. Chain. I stood with my back against the door, heart hammering so hard I thought I might be sick. I could hear him outside, just standing there. I knew he was still there, even though I couldn't see him. After what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute, I heard his footsteps retreat, heard his door open and close. I slid down to the floor and sat there in the dark hallway shaking. And all I could think was, this is my fault. Not his, mine. For trusting, for being polite, for giving him the key in the first place, for not listening to myself, for ignoring every warning sign because I was too afraid of being rude, too desperate to prove I could live alone, too convinced that my instincts were the problem. I'd let this happen. I'd invited him in, metaphorically and literally, and now I couldn't make him leave. I sat there until the sun came up. I moved out 2 weeks later. I called my landlord and told him I was breaking my lease. He wasn't happy. There was a penalty. 2 months' rent. I didn't care. I would have paid anything. I found a new place across town. A apartment building with security doors and cameras. I didn't tell anyone in the neighborhood where I was going. Not Patricia. Not the landlord. No one. I packed in a frenzy, throwing things into boxes without labeling them, without organizing, just desperate to get out. The day the moving truck came, I worked as fast as I could, loading boxes, furniture, everything I could carry. Eric came out of his house around noon. He didn't help. He didn't say anything. He just sat on his front step and watched. I could feel his eyes on me the whole time, every trip to the truck, every box I carried. He just sat there, watching. The movers asked if I needed help with the bookshelf, the one he'd assembled. I told them to leave it. I didn't want it anymore. I didn't want anything that he'd touched. When the truck was finally loaded, I did one last walkthrough of the house. Made sure I hadn't forgotten anything. Made sure there was nothing left of me in that space. I stood in the empty living room where we'd assembled the bookshelf, where we'd sat and had tea, where I'd convinced myself that everything was fine. I felt nothing, just emptiness, just the need to leave. I walked out, locked the door for the last time, and put the keys in the mailbox like the landlord had instructed. Eric was still sitting on his step. I got in my car without looking at him, but I could feel him watching as I drove away. I never found out what he wanted. I never found out what he did while I was gone those 10 days at Christmas. I never found out if he went through my things, if he stood in my bedroom, if he watched me sleep. I don't know if he kept a copy of the key before he put it back under the mat. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed. but I think about it. I think about it more than I want to. I think about how normal he seemed, how grateful I was when he helped me with my car, how that gratitude made me ignore the too wide smile, how easy it was to trust him just because he was polite and lived next door and said the right things. I think about the spare key under the mat, and I think about how I knew that I shouldn't leave it there. That some part of me was screaming not to, but I ignored it because I didn't want to be paranoid, because I didn't want to be rude, because I didn't want to be the kind of woman who sees danger in every kind gesture. I think about all the times I told myself I was overreacting. The drawer that was open, the book that was moved, the door that was closed, the deadbolt that wasn't locked. How many times did he come into my house? How many times did I ignore what I knew in my body to be true because I couldn't prove it? Because I was more afraid of being wrong than I was of being in danger? I don't live alone anymore. I have a partner now. We have a dog. We live in a building with a doorman. We know our neighbors, but we keep our distance. And I never, ever leave a spare key outside. Not under a mat. Not in a lockbox. Not with anyone. I don't care if it's inconvenient. I don't care if it seems paranoid. Because I learned something in that house on Maple Street. I learned that my instincts were right. That the voice in my head that said something was wrong wasn't paranoia, it was protection. I learned that being polite isn't worth being unsafe. I learned that I'd rather be rude, ungrateful, difficult, paranoid, and wrong 1,000 times than ignore that voice ever again. Sometimes late at night, when I can't sleep, I wonder if Eric still lives in that house. If someone else moved in next door. If they met him when their car wouldn't start or when they needed help carrying something heavy. If they thought he was nice. If he's already helped them with something. If they've already given him a key. I don't tell this story to scare people. I tell it because I want them to recognize the feeling I had. That uncomfortable pull in your gut when something seems wrong, but you can't explain why. That voice that says be careful that you've learned to ignore because it seems irrational. I want them to know that voice is almost never wrong. Even when you can't prove it. Even when you can't explain it. Even when it would be easier, more polite, more convenient to ignore it. This isn't a story about a scary neighbor. It's a story about not trusting myself, about learning too slowly that the instinct that says something's wrong deserves to be heard, about how much I was willing to ignore, to rationalize, to explain away, all because I was afraid of being the kind of person who doesn't trust people, about how I almost paid for that with something I can't even name. I'm telling you this because I want you to listen to that voice before you hand over the key, before you convince yourself you're overreacting, before you choose someone else's comfort over your own safety, before it's too late to just walk away. Trust yourself, even when you can't prove why, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it makes you seem paranoid or rude or ungrateful, especially then, because that voice, it's trying to keep you alive.